Hey, Frog fans, welcome into another episode of Frogs Insider presented by the Flying T Club. Jamie Plunkett here. I am your host. No Melissa Treebosser this week. She is still on her fun European vacay. We hope that she's having a great time. We hope that she's not thinking about anything to do with this or with TCU and that she's just vibing with the people that she is with. Very excited to have her back next episode, though, as we kind of re-enter into the second half of TCU football season and start talking about where the team goes from here, taking a look at Utah and all of the rest of the games still left on the schedule. But for now, no Melissa, just me. You're stuck with me. But we do have a very fun guest joining the show in a little bit. Sam Kahn from The Athletic will be along. He and I had a really fun conversation earlier this week. I don't know if fun's the word, maybe, but we had a really good conversation about what's going on with TCU, what his kind of analysis of the issue is. He wrote a fantastic article for The Athletic that ran in the New York Times over the weekend that I thought was really, really well done. So we get into that a little bit, talk a little bit about kind of the downward spiral and where TCU goes from here. I think he brings some really good insight to the conversation because he's been covering not only college football, but specifically the state of Texas for quite some time. And so he has, I think, a unique lens through which he kind of looks at this TCU problem, not fully from the national analyst perspective, not fully from the beat writer perspective, but he does have kind of one foot in both of those worlds a little bit. So excited to share that conversation with you guys. Plus, we're going to get into a little bit of the changes that have been going on in the college football landscape and the college athletics landscape, really, over the last couple of days. There have been changes to the transfer portal window for next year. There have been changes to the way that teams go about even signing players from high school and transfer players. No more national letter of intent. No more fax machines on signing day, which is a sad end of an era there. But what's going to replace the national letter of intent? We're going to talk about that a little bit. And then we're going to talk about something that Ross Dellinger reported on for Yahoo Sports earlier this week as well. This idea called Project Rudy, a super league. We're going to get into what that is, what its goals would be, and whether or not TCU would be on the inside looking out. First, though, a little podcast business, as always. Big thanks to the Flying T Club for being the presenting sponsor of this show. They are TCU's NIL institution, NIL collective. They do a fantastic job of supporting TCU student athletes. They support over 110 student athletes at TCU, providing them with name, image, and likeness monies, payments, funding, however you want to frame that. You can go to theflyingtclub.com and see what they do, see how they operate, read more about the organization, and find ways to plug in, whether that's through making gifts or participating in some of the nonprofit work that they do. The Flying T Club is really unique, in my opinion, because they do things can't be really unique. The Flying T Club is unique, in my opinion, because they connect with a lot of organizations in and around the city of Fort Worth. They pair student athletes with those organizations. They do a lot of really incredible work, and they make it a point of emphasis to give back to the greater city of Fort Worth. And I just think that's really cool. It's a fantastic organization. Know and love the people over there. And I'm thankful for our partnership here at Frogs Insider with the Flying T Club. So flyingtclub.com is where you can go and see how you can plug into TCU's NIL collective today. Also, a big thanks to Dave Campbell's Texas Football for continuing to put up with us and including us in the Republic of Football Network. Very thankful for them. If you want to go and search wherever you get your podcasts for the Republic of Football Network, you will see our feed. It includes this show. It also includes shows for every D1 football program in the state of Texas. That's all the names that you would think of, and maybe some that you wouldn't. Rice, Texas State, UTEP, UTSA are part of this as well. Sam Houston State is in the mix there, along with A&M and UT, Baylor, TCU, Texas, Texas Tech, all those schools as well. So, Republican Football Network, wherever you get your podcasts, go and subscribe, leave a rating and a review there. If you just want the TCU content, if you just want Frogs Insider, we have our own feed as well. We do a couple extra shows in that feed that you don't find on the main Republic of Football Network feed. So, if you're really interested in the show, if you're really digging what we're doing here, then go find that Frogs Insider feed. Again, it's wherever you get your podcasts: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. We also have the YouTube channel. Can't forget about that. We're growing. We're closing in ever so quickly on 800 subscribers now. Very excited. We have our goal of 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel by Halloween. It looks like we're going to get there. We're on pace right now, so let's not let up on that, because like Melissa and I have been teasing, we got some fun stuff going on. When we get to 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel, we're going to do some fun stuff for y'all as a thank you, and we're also going to punish each other by picking out what that person has to do. If y'all recall, we got to 500 subscribers. We did the smelling salts. It was gross. It was terrible. I hated it. But this time we're going to pick out something for each other. Melissa's going to pick something for me. She said if we get to 1,000 by Halloween, that she will let it be you that decides. She'll put out a little poll, and y'all can pick what I have to subject myself to in that moment. So get over to the YouTube channel, Frogs Insider, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment under the videos, help the algorithm out, share it with a friend, do all the things. And we'll see if we can get to 1,000 subscribers by Halloween. Very cool. All right. I think that's enough podcast business. Oh, I did want to make one note. Got a lot of feedback from last episode when Marshall Newhouse hopped on. Super thankful for him to be a part of the show. Y'all apparently loved the conversation. I'll tell you that. The numbers are going crazy. So thank you to everybody that has listened to that episode. I hope you came back for this one. And just know that we'll definitely have Marshall back at some point this season or in the off season if we can't fit it into his schedule. Love having him on, known him for a long time. Really, really insightful conversation that he and I had. So if you are hearing this and you thought, oh, I didn't catch the last episode, go back and check it out. Marshall Newhouse stopped by and had some really interesting things to say. Listening to him, kind of wax poetic about the offensive line was really something. I appreciated his insight there because no one is a better subject matter expert when talking about the TCU offensive line than Marshall Newhouse. So, again, thanks to Marshall for being on last episode, and thanks to everybody who's provided some feedback on that show specifically. Really do appreciate each and every one of you. So, okay, let's jump in to what we're actually doing here on this episode 89. Sam Conn Jr., the Athletics' own, the Texpert, senior college football writer, joins the show to break down what's going on in his perspective with TCU football right now. Let's jump into that conversation. Frog fans, welcome into another episode of Frogs Insider presented by the Flying T Club. Jamie Plunkett here with a very special guest today. You know him as the senior college football writer and Texpert over at The Athletic. Sam Conn joins the show. Sam, thank you so much for taking the time today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Man, let's talk about the state of TCU football, which if you had said after the national championship game against Georgia that things were going to fall off this precipitously, I think TCU fans would have had some choice words for you, Sam. But we look back now, and since the start of 2023, they're 8-10 overall. They're 4-8 in the Big 12. And, your article from earlier this weekend detailing kind of just the nature of the drop-off, I thought was really brought to light some kind of significant issues within the program. Before we jump into some of those, though, just tell me kind of what, from a 30,000-foot view, is going on with TCU football right now.
I just think this is a program that seems to just lack cohesion. Because when you watch them practice and when you see the talent on the roster, it looks good. I remember going in there this spring and spending some time, watching them practice and watching the coaches and spending time with the coaching staff. And you look at the guys running around and they've got size, they've got speed, they've got dynamic players across the roster. And so they're to me a quintessential, hey, they look good when they get off the bus, certainly compared to the other Big 12 teams they're playing. But what you see on Saturdays is not translating, and there's so many mistakes from penalties, turnovers. I think back to the SMU game when they gave away so many points just with self-inflicted wounds.
Yeah.
And also, I wonder and have wondered, the coordinator, the coordinator situation, when you have a CEO head coach like Sonny Dykes is, you have to nail your coordinators. And I don't know that they've done that. Obviously he made the change from Joe Gillespie to Andy Avalos, who I think is well respected in this business. But, so far with what we saw against Houston, with some of the missed tackles and things like that, you still have some questions as to how effective this unit's going to be. And then on offense, I'm looking at Kendall Briles, who is really well known for the run game. And I'm looking at a team that has run the ball less and less on average per game each of the last few years since he's taken over. They're running the ball less now per game than they did in the 2022 national championship run season. So when you have, if you're going to take the Sonny Dykes approach, which I think is a good one, I think in this day and age in college football, it's a smart one. But you've got to nail those guys because Sonny gives his guys autonomy they're essentially the head coach of the offense and the head coach of the defense, and he lets them do their thing. So if you're going to do that, you got to nail those hires. And you also have to, and then beyond that, the culture has to be right. And Sonny, I know you guys have probably heard it plenty from him over this offseason. I heard it as well, that last year the culture did not carry over from 22 to 23. You have to wonder with some of the mistakes you're seeing, is that still an issue? I don't know if it is, but I have to wonder if it is.
That's a great point about culture, and he's pushed back against that question a couple of times this year, where he did so pretty clearly, I think, in his postgame after the Houston loss as well, to say last season there were some locker room issues, but he hasn't seen any of that this year. And so from Sonny himself, it seems like it is a pretty cohesive group. Like you mentioned, on the practice field, they look like they can play the part. They look physical. They look athletic. They're talented. And so there's clearly some sort of disconnect between Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And I think what you're saying about coordinators is really interesting too, because I think some of the questions around Sonny Dykes and his role as the CEO head coach right now are, at what point do coordinators start to lose some of that autonomy when things aren't going well? You mentioned the tackling. TCU's 0-3 when they missed double-digit tackles this season. They missed 15 against Houston. They missed 11 against SMU and 14 against UCF. Most of those were in the running game, trying to stop the run. They're giving up, over 200 yards on the ground per game right now, which is just not good, especially when you have an Andy Avalos defensive coordinator who came in to this role and said his priority was to stop the run. So just there's some sort of disconnect happening right now between Sonny Dykes, his coaching staff, the coaching staff, and the players. But at what point does a CEO head coach start to intervene in the middle of the season when things aren't going the way they're supposed to?
Well, if there's ever a time, you would think this week when they're off, right, would be a time to address some of that. And part of it is, I think you have to play to some degree to your strengths. So Sonny's an offensive guy. If that means that Sonny needs to be more hands-on with the offense because that's where he made his reputation and established himself in this industry, then I certainly understand that. Defensively, obviously that's not his forte. I don't know that he's had a lot of teams that have had great defense on the other side, so I don't know how much he can offer on that front. But when it comes to philosophy and when it comes to big picture things, certainly you steer that direction as a head coach. The head coach is the one setting the tone. But there's enough brain power. That's the other thing about this, is there's enough brain power in that building because you've got, 4 former head coaches? You got Sonny, a current one. You got Andy Avalos as former head coach. You got Dana Holgorsen. You got Todd Graham as analysts or consultants on the staff.
Ken Wilson as well.
That's right. Kevin Wilson, linebackers coach. So you got 5 guys who either are or have been head coaches. There is enough brain power in that building to figure that out. So with all that, if you cannot get the week to week stuff to translate on the field, then there's an issue with coaching, whether it's at the coordinator level or the position coach level or the head coach level. There is an issue because we hear Sonny Dykes say over and over how great the practices are Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then we see the product on the field, which looks nothing like it on Saturday.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. Sonny's always struggled to field a defense that goes all the way back to his time as the head coach at Louisiana Tech, through his time at Cal. SMU didn't have great defenses either while he was there, and now we're seeing that same issue at TCU. When you have I thought this was interesting in the offseason too when he was talking about it. Dana Holgorsen, offensive-minded coach, very well respected, very good offensively, I would say. I don't know how Houston folks feel about him, but he's been working with the defense. They've been doing some self-scouting where he is primarily self-scouting the defense. Todd Graham, on the opposite side, a defensive-minded guy, has been scouting the offense. Is there maybe an opportunity there to look at both of those guys and say, hey, the self-scouting has been fine, but we need your wisdom in the room where you're an expert right now? And is that a possible switch that he could make to get those two guys maybe more in line with what their expertise is?
Ultimately, it's up to Sonny, obviously, but yeah, I think it's something that you have to explore, because you got to explore all the available options that you can to improve this football team and turn it around. Because for what it's worth, as rough as this season has started, the season is not completely lost. This is still a 500 football team, and there's opportunities when you look at the rest of the schedule. Okay, going to Utah is going to be tough, but none of the rest of the teams on the schedule are unbeatable. And so there are opportunities down the stretch here to really still turn this into a solid season if you can make some fixes, which is where this off week comes in handy. But you're right. I don't think there's anything wrong. I think it's actually smart if you're Sonny to tap into some of that knowledge. Like you said, to go back to your side. I think of Dana Holgorsen as one of the better play callers in the sport. One of the things that I think people got frustrated with at Houston, at least from a fan perspective, is maybe he didn't call it enough. Like there were times early on, I think he did. And then kind of down the stretch, Shannon Dawson called it, and that was great. And it worked out really well. And then Shannon took a job in Miami. And then when they replaced Shannon, they promoted from within. And it seemed like, that Dana still wasn't as hands-on calling, but when he called it, and I think he had a real hands-on role in that game against Texas last year in terms of strategy and game plan and how they attacked it. And of course, Houston, as you know, came very, very close to at least, sending that game in overtime late or potentially winning it, losing to a top 5 football team, then of going to the playoff. When I see that Dana, I think to myself, that guy still got it in terms of a play caller, in terms of an offensive game planner, scheme wise. So there's nothing wrong with tapping into that. And I think it's smart to tap into that brain power when you're in a situation like this and you've got to get something going. If nothing else, and if I'm Sonny, if there's one thing I think this team needs to do, is I think they've just got to run the ball a little bit more. You got to commit to the run. I feel like, and we know Josh Hoover has had some turnovers, but I feel like a lot is being put on Josh Hoover's shoulders, because he is the guy in this offense, and I feel like it's all running through him, and that's all well and good, but he's played a lot. He started, last year, quite a bit, but he's still, I want to say, a relatively young quarterback. And so I think getting the ball, first of all, let's get back to what this offensive system was built on. This offensive system is really built on downhill running. It's built on gashing people against light boxes and moving the chains in that way. Let's get, I'm going to read you a couple numbers real quick, because I was looking this up.
Yeah.
In 2022, they averaged 37.7 carries per game, 53rd in the country. 2023, 33.8. 2024 so far, 29.5, and which is 117 nation. So they keep going down in running the ball. And so if you're not running the ball, you're not controlling the clock. You're not keeping your defense off the field, and everything I think kind of meshes together. And I think that's something that I think that you have to look at if you're TCU.
I've got to chuckle a little bit, because we're sitting here in 2024 talking about Big 12 football and establishing the run. And you look across the conference, and that has been the trend over the last couple of years, with just an incredible stable of running backs up and down rosters in the Big 12. Defenses have become so in tune with stopping the passing game that running is now more available there. And yet, like you said, TCU the last year and a half has really failed to establish that area of the offense. And I think, too, just as someone who's been watching a lot of TCU football, it comes down to how they've constructed the offensive line a little bit, because they have portaled a lot of guys in on the offensive line. And there are always going to be questions when you build a line that way about cohesion, about understanding and trusting each other. And we've seen a lot of those kind of mental mistakes along the offensive line over the last 18 football games, really. And I think that's been a large part of why Kendall Briles has tried to move away from the running game a little bit, especially when, a lot of Bryle's offensive system is not only relying on downhill running, but it's a lot of running from the quarterback position.
Mm-hmm.
And Hoover's just not as mobile as quarterbacks that Kendall Briles has worked with in the past. So I agree. I think that it's maybe swung a little bit too far in the other direction, and that there's a lot being asked of Josh Hoover right now. You mentioned him being young. Friday was only his 12th start of his career, so he's officially got one regular season under his belt, essentially. And
he's still pretty good, by the way. He's a pretty good quarterback.
Yeah,
he's got to take care of the ball.
Yeah, you're asking a young kid like that to throw it 45, 50 times a game consistently, there are going to be mistakes. And we've seen a lot of those in the last couple of weeks. They can clean those up. But I think the root cause of some of this running game issue really starts on the offensive line and how they've chosen to construct that. And I'll be curious to see over the last 6 games of this season if there are any adjustments made, maybe opportunities to get some of these young, really highly regarded recruits that they've got on campus now, some of these freshmen and sophomores, some more reps just to see kind of what they've got developing, so that maybe the kind of their theory around how they're growing their offensive line maybe shifts back towards high school recruiting a little bit more. I think that's something to keep an eye on for the last 6 games for TCU fans. But kind of as we keep going here, when we see the kind of sweeping issues that we've seen from TCU football, it's not just a single phase, it's all 3. It's not just an individual player making mistakes here and there, it's full units. I think that tends to be an indicator of coaching a little bit more than it is single player. Now, a guy like J.P. Richardson trying to get 2 more yards, fumbling the football, that's a player execution issue. Offensive line consistently not blocking the run, maybe more of a coaching issue. That's kind of how I'm parsing it out here. But when you see those wide sweeping issues, and then Sonny Dykes comes into the post-game press conference following that loss to Houston, and he says, quote, and I was sitting 15 feet away from him when he said this, "I don't really have an answer for why we played the way we did." Is that a red flag to you at all?
A little, but I will say this, and I know you guys have gotten intimately familiar with it too. I appreciate that kind of candor, because that's, I think we as reporters, that's what we're looking for. We hate the canned cliche answer that every coach gives. We want authenticity. We want honesty. And that was the thing that struck me most about Sonny's postgame, is that was very authentic. You could kind of see the pain on his face. And I think to some degrees the shock of how far this program has fallen, because it's very clear. It's very clear. You can see it on the field. There are no answers that he has at this moment, because we're not seeing them executed. And I think the other thing that's probably frustrating for him is that in some of these instances, like think back to UCF, that's a game where you played well, for a little bit more than a half before everything started going down. This is one where, against Houston, where you were a heavy favorite. This offense hadn't scored at all for the last 2 weeks, and they came out and looked faster. They looked more sound. They looked more excited. And that, to me, is the biggest red flag. It's not that Sonny has answers, doesn't have answers. It's that why in a home game on a Friday night and a team that is wounded comes in and they have more edge than your team does. That, to me, is alarming. So, can Sonny fix it? I don't know. That's the other alarming question. But yeah, if he's saying that, he's being honest. But guess what? That's what you get paid the big bucks to do, is you got to figure out a way to fix it.
Yeah, authenticity is great, and he's never had a problem with authenticity. He's never had a problem with accountability. He's very willing in a lot of press conferences to say that this all does come back to him. He's fully aware of his role and his responsibility for putting a competitive product on the field. But yeah, to your question, can Sonny fix it? Not only can Sonny fix it, which I don't know that either of us have the answer to that today. Maybe a more intriguing question: how much longer do you think Sonny Dykes has to fix it, because there are a lot of moving pieces in college football right now. We've seen Project Rudy, we've seen what college football or college sports today, these realignment super league proposals that are coming on. We've heard a lot about, just general conference realignment, with how challenging it can be to fundraise for NIL, and the ever growing threat of the transfer portal, now just people opting into redshirt. All of these challenges. What do you think the runway looks like for Sonny Dykes to turn this thing around?
So that's interesting, because if you had asked me coming into this season, is there any chance that his job would be in danger under any circumstance this year, I would say no, because we're still fairly short time frame removed from the national championship game appearance. But and I don't know where the athletic department is in terms of being able to afford a buyout and things of all that sort. But I get the sense, just from knowing TCU situation, that they're in pretty good shape. When I hear Jeremiah Donati talk about how they're preparing for revenue sharing, I seem to think they're in pretty good shape financially. So could this turn into a job on the line season at the end of this year? I think at some point, if this keeps trending the direction it is, I wouldn't rule it out, because it's clear, and Jamie, you have a much better pulse on this than I do, but I feel like the fans are out. I feel like the apathy has set in for a large portion of the fan base. And this is why I said, before the season started, I had said this, but written this a couple times, about how I thought this was a huge year for Sonny Dykes and TCU. And I said, I don't think he's on the hot seat, but I think for perception's sake, this was a critical year for them to get moving back in the right direction, because what's going to happen, and so far it does seem to be happening in my opinion, is you have a fan base that was used to Gary Patterson for 20 years and used to the success that Gary Patterson's program engineered with his recruiting, with his development and retention and all those things. And Sonny Dykes comes in, takes a 5-7 program that got Gary Patterson fired, and takes him to the national championship game, and it's all roses and it's all fun. But now we're a few years removed from that, and it's very convenient. It's very easy to forget how mediocre the program was for the last 4 years of Gary Patterson era. And I see a lot of fans kind of romanticizing what the TCU football was under Gary Patterson for the previous 16 years, which is the best run in program history. So now I think you're measuring, and this is not to say it's unfair, because I think it's totally fair to have high expectations, Sonny, but I think you have fans that are remembering not too long ago how great this program was, and now where the program is under Sonny, and doing that comparison of, well, look where we were under GP and look where we are under Sonny Dykes. And I think that's why I thought this season was so critical for them to get back on the right track, just to change the narrative back in a positive direction. And the start and these last 3 weeks couldn't have gone worse in that regard. And so I say that all to say is that coaching hires and firings are not all just about finances. It's not all just about wins and losses. A lot of times I found with athletic directors and administrations, it's about mood. It's about mood of the fan base. It's about whether your fan base is excited or whether they're apathetic. And yes, you may have to spend a lot of money in buyout, but how much money do you stand to lose in donations and tickets, butts and seats and concessions and things like that if the stadium is half full? I've seen that in Houston did that math with Major Applewhite 6 years ago. Even though Major Applewhite had a winning record for 2 seasons, those other factors and the way they performed at the end pushed the administration to make the decision that, hey, we're going to flip this. We're going to go get Dana Holgorsen because we think he's going to reinvigorate the fan base. I don't know if we will get to that point with TCU this year, but if they keep losing games like they have the last few, then I think it becomes a much more serious conversation, because I came into this year thinking he'll have through at least 2025. But now I'm wondering if that could change. And if they come out against Utah and they look flat, I'm going to use a comparison that I'm sure TCU fans will appreciate. If they come out and look like Baylor looked against BYU a couple weeks ago in the first quarter and go down 21-0 on the road, buddy, it's going to be hard to stomach the angst that comes from the fan base in that regard.
A lot of angst, and you're right. There is a lot of anger right now. I think we're in the anger phase for TCU fans. We're closing in quickly on apathy, though, and like you said, that's a really dangerous place to be. Not only internally as a fan base for a singular university, but when you look at the Texas football landscape, you just lost to an in-state competitor in Houston, who first-year head coach Willie Fritz. I think that's a great long-term hire for UH. He's shown himself to be a program builder. This is probably his last stop, so he's gonna, pour everything that he's got left into it. SMU is now an ACC school. They've got all the momentum in the world right now. Joey McGuire is recruiting at a level unforeseen so far at Texas Tech, and they're winning some football games. Baylor on the precipice of a head coach change as well, probably. So you're talking about, is there going to be in-state competition if you're trying to replace a head coach? Should there be concern from TCU's perspective at this point that they're about to maybe lose some of the positioning they've worked so hard to earn within the state itself?
I think in the long term, no, I wouldn't worry about that, just because I think the transient nature of this sport and the way things flip. I think maybe 2 years ago I would have said, as conferences were still getting realigned, and we still are getting realignment, but not at the Power 4 level as much now. Now that the Big 12 is kind of settled, I don't find that urgency the way I heard Donati have that urgency when he made the Gary Patterson decision, because you heard him talk about when he made that decision, when he made the hire, that part of the timing aspect of it was how important it was to make sure they're good in football as the landscape changed. So the revenue sharing and all that stuff is coming, but I don't think one bad season necessarily flushes all the goodwill and flushes all the momentum that TCU has built as a program, because TCU has gotten to this point for more than 2 decades of effort, going back to getting left out of the Southwest Conference, the investment that they put in, obviously the success under Gary Patterson, and people are not going to forget the Rose Bowl in 2010 or the 2014 season, or the 2022 national championship run. It's all that stuff still happened. They're still financially in a really good spot. They're still in one of the best recruiting footprints in the country in DFW. They're still in one of the most fertile states for recruiting talent in the country, in the state of Texas. All that stuff is not going to change. So I think in that way, TCU's okay. But then I do look at the last few years, because this is something that I was looking at the other night, and I look at going back to 2018 when they were 7-6. The win total since then: 7, 5, 6, 5, 13, 5, and now we're out of double-digit win contention at this point here. So in that 7-year span, the 13-2 season in the national championship run's the outlier.
Yeah.
The average for this program has been between 5 and 7 wins in that span. And that, to me, is what's most alarming. So it's not necessarily a momentum thing in terms, to me, of what's happening in the larger part of the sport. But to your point about the pecking order in programs, Baylor right now is down. Texas Tech is rising. Texas and Texas A&M obviously are a little bit on their own island because of where they are in conference finances. But yeah, you've got to get this turned, not because of where you are in the pecking order, but just because you've got to get this program back to winning on a consistent basis. Because I remember in the Gary Patterson era, it was you very rarely went more than 2 seasons without a double-digit win season. And now you're averaging basically between 5 and 7 wins, with the exception being 2022. And that, to me, is, I think, the thing that's probably the biggest concern, because this program has not been at that double-digit win season level consistently since really a decade ago.
Yeah, it's something that's got to get turned around. Whether that's Sonny or whoever else 2-3 years from now is yet to be determined. But I think that there's a growing level of concern, not only from TCU fans, but from folks at TCU about that issue of status and perception. Because when it's coming, it's less about when or what is coming down the road as far as realignment, and when it's coming. Like, change is going to come. And TCU, I think, has worked so hard, like you said, over these last 20, 25 years to make sure that they were never on the outside looking in again. And the results on the field still do play into that. Maybe less so than we first anticipated, but results still matter. When you think about, like you said, Baylor is downsliding right now. TCU's obviously backsliding a little bit. From a kind of next man up perspective, whether they're currently in the state of Texas or not, what coaching prospects are out there, whether that's for TCU or for Baylor or for another school? What coaching prospects are out there that you think are in the best position to be a head coach in the state of Texas this next round of hiring that's going to come up at some point?
Yeah, I think the popular one to look at in this state in particular is G.J. Kinney at Texas State for obvious reasons, because that's a program that did not have a lot of success before he got there. Very, very little investment in facilities and infrastructure until this recent administration came in, and now they've been better about that. But Kinney did a really good job of flipping that program in a hurry from the time that the mood around that program at the end of the Jake Spavital era was not very good. And then in a season, he got them to a bowl game for the first time and really changed the outlook. And then this year they lost that same Houston game, which I think was a little bit frustrating, but overall this is still a program that looks like it's moving in the right direction. He's got the roots being a Texas high school coach, former Texas high school player, his son of a Texas high school coach. And I think he's got a nice vibe, and I think he's got a really good kind of energy, and he did it at Incarnate Word as well. So he had a really good run there as well. That said, for TCU, I think I would still like to see a little more from GJ because he's a little bit on the younger side. I think he's like 34, but I think he's really intriguing. Eric Morris in North Texas right now looks really good. That's a guy who built Incarnate Word into what it was when GJ took over and he took them to their first playoff. Spent a season as the offense coordinator at Wazoo, and now you look at what he's doing in North Texas. They lost a ton of guys to the portal, and I mean a ton of talent that is out there playing at Power 4 programs. And now I think they're sitting here at 5-1, and so he has done a terrific job. Texas Tech guy, obviously has a deep history and roots in the state. If I'm looking outside the box, outside of the state of Texas, I think the one that intrigues me a whole lot is Barry Odom at UNLV. I think he's done a fantastic job. He's got some head coaching experience in that he was at Mizzou before, didn't work out quite as well. He succeeded Gary Pinkel after Pinkel retired, but has done a bang-up job at UNLV. He was in the mix for that Houston job last year. I really liked him, and I think he's going to be, as UNLV continues to succeed this year, he's going to be a name that's going to be bounced around. So those are just a few. There's a lot of other ones out there. Like, I'm a big fan of Jason Candle. I think he's done a terrific job. I think he's been heavily overlooked in the coaching circles. I'm a big John Summerall fan at Tulane. I don't know if he'd be a guy that would make a jump after 1 year, but Summerall, what he did at Troy, and then I see how Tulane is playing now, that guy has been a winner. And talking to athletic directors, agents, people in that world, Summerall's probably been one of the most impressive candidates to the people in that industry. And so those are some of the names that stick out to me, and ones that if you're a program in the state of Texas looking for your next coach at the Power 4 level, those are names that I think would all make sense.
Awesome. Sam, thank you so much for your time today. Just let everybody know where they can find you.
Theathletic.com. Go to the college football page. And I'm still on Twitter. I don't tweet as much as I used to, but SCon Jr., so you can find me there.
Awesome. Sam, thanks so much again, man. We really do appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much to Sam for stopping by. He is insanely busy, so the fact that he took time to have that conversation, full half hour, really is meaningful. So if you catch him on X or Twitter, whatever you still call it, just drop him a note. Say thanks for having that conversation. Just show him some love for coming by the program and having that conversation. I thought it was really helpful and insightful. Let's jump into a couple of things, quick notes here as we roll along into the bye week. The transfer window for football, men's basketball, and women's basketball was reduced recently. It is now 30 days, down from 45. And the reasoning from the NCAA here is that it's going to do a better job of providing stability for student athletes and programs. It's going to streamline the transfer process a little bit. to better fit recruitment and competition schedules. Really, all this means is that transfers are going to have a shorter amount of time to get in the portal. It's not going to impact when players that are in the portal already can commit and sign to a school. So that part stays unaffected. The amount of time that a player has to decide to go into the portal and actually do the thing is a little bit shorter. It's 30 days. It's still so the dates are still a little wonky, because what they're doing is they're still, for the basketball teams, putting that window at a time when the tournament is still happening. So the note from the NCAA reads as follows. Moving forward, the notification of transfer windows in basketball will be open for 30 days, starting the day after the conclusion of the second round of each NCAA Division I championship, when 91% of teams in both men's and women's basketball have concluded their season. For the 2024-25 academic year, the window will be open March 24th to April 22nd for men's basketball and March 25th through April 23rd for women's basketball. I understand that players need time to get in the portal. Teams need time to contact, establish relationships, schedule visits, do the things, sign them, get them to campus, yada, yada. It still makes no sense to me that you're going to ask, even if it's only 9%, as the NCAA is talking here, only 9% of the teams will still be playing. Yeah, but those are theoretically the best 9% of your sport will still be playing their games. Why is, I mean, I guess maybe it's a competitive advantage for teams that have already been eliminated to have that leg up of, oh, well, our season's over. We can just fully focus on recruiting. The teams that are still playing have to have 1 foot in and 1 foot out for a little while. Maybe it's their way of competitive balancing things out because there's no draft or anything like that, but it's still a little ridiculous. And the best players that enter the portal, regardless of when they enter the portal, already probably have a destination or two in mind. And it's not unlikely that some of those destinations are still playing basketball at that point. So why not just roll it to the end? Let the national championship have its moment. We don't have to worry about transfer portal crap while the tournament's happening. Like, the NCAA is essentially saying that it's okay with transfer portal news clouding all of the content coverage around the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight, the Final Four, and the national championship. And it just doesn't make sense to me. And not only that, but because the tournament dates actually happen on different dates, the windows for men's basketball and women's basketball are a day off. I don't think I'm OCD, but that one's driving me absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy that it's off by a day. As someone who tracks both of these sports and will be busy during that time of year, super annoying to just have one more thing to keep up with. Maybe that's just a me problem. I don't know. For football, the transfer window will be a total of 30 days, but it'll be spread over 2 windows. The first window will open the Monday after the FBS Conference Championship weekend, and it'll be 20 days. Okay? So Conference Championship weekend this year is December 7th and 8th. So after that, it will open for 20 days. It'll go from December 9th to December 28th. So players will have the ability to jump in the portal then. The second window will open in the spring for 10 days. That'll be April 16th through the 25th. So it'll be interesting to see if we have this gamesmanship where schools, and they did this last year too, some schools got that window. They saw, hey, here's the spring window. Let's put our spring camp over that window so that players maybe don't have time to evaluate what's going on in their, like, what their standing is here. They can't hit the portal if our spring game's on April 26th, right? They'll either miss spring ball or they'll go through spring ball and miss their opportunity to hit the portal. There's going to be some gamesmanship there. I'm just telling you, we saw it last year. We're going to see it again in 2025 as well. But that 30-day window will be split up into 2, 20 days in December from the 9th to the 28th, and 10 days in April from the 16th to the 25th. I don't think this changes a whole lot. Really, truly, the only irritating thing for me is that the basketball window's open while the tournament is still going on. I just think it's dumb. It makes no sense. In a the the calendar for these sports is already year round, if you're just going to just lean into it being year round and don't overlap two really important things on top of each other, just you're pushing coaches to the brink. You're pushing coaches to the brink, I think, at that point. The other interesting thing that the NCAA came out with, and this has been in the works for a minute, is that they are doing away with the National Letter of Intent. And the National Letter of Intent for 60 years has been the way that a player commits to a team on paper, right? So we all hear about the verbal commits. That's the big thing. You get the graphic tweeted out, you get the articles written about you, the interviews, all this other stuff, and then 3 weeks later, you get another graphic because you flipped your commitment to someone else. You get more articles, you get all this stuff, yada yada. But then on actual signing day, the National Letter of Intent is the actual piece of paper that players have been signing and faxing in for 60 years that says, I am coming to your school. And so when you hear circumstances where, take Jaden Rashada, for instance, when he committed to Florida and then decided, hey, they lied to me about my NIL, I don't want to be here anymore. The NLI, the National Letter of Intent, was the thing that he had to be released from so that he could hit the portal and go and transfer ultimately to Arizona State. So NLI has been around for a long time. The move is not surprising because there is a new thing that's coming in, not a new old thing that's going to replace the NLI essentially. The traditional NLI, National Letter of Intent, bound athletes to a school for 1 year. It's a 1 year commitment in exchange for an athletic scholarship. So it's a 1 year commitment. It gets you in school, and then after that 1 year, everybody's free to transfer out if they'd like. Now that's going to be replaced by financial aid and scholarship agreements. Now these agreements have always existed, and they've always been signed at the same time as National Letter of Intent, and transfers sign them as their kind of National Letter of Intent when they go to another school, but they've always been non-binding. With the restructure that we're seeing, with the flexibility of the transfer portal, binding kids to a school for a year probably has some legal challenges that it could face in court with the current setup. And so doing away with the NLI provides more flexibility, and the financial aid and scholarship agreements are going to be a little bit more binding. Here's how it's going to work. So the process will become more flexible. Athletes can sign the binding financial agreements, but they can still transfer more freely, which will probably lead to changes in how schools approach recruiting strategies. Larger programs are probably going to benefit more due to their resources to manage NIL deals, so on and so forth. But the reality is that this is a step in the same direction as everything else that we're seeing, this kind of broader trend about finance and revenue and NIL and how that's impacting the sport. So doing away with the NLI, not necessarily a terribly bad thing. It's essentially just being replaced with the financial aid and scholarship agreements. Those are going to have a little bit more strength behind them. So six one way, half a dozen the other kind of situation, really, in my opinion. Not a terrible thing. But let's jump into the thing that I've really wanted to talk about since I read the article that Ross Dellinger put together earlier this week for Yahoo Sports. And if you're not following Ross on Twitter, if you're not paying attention to his work over at Yahoo, I would encourage you to do so for a couple of reasons, but mainly he is, in my opinion, the leading voice on realignment right now. He is all over it. He does a fantastic job of breaking news, providing relevant information, providing context to what he's breaking. I just think he does a fantastic job overall. So make sure that you're following Ross Dellinger and reading his stuff over at Yahoo Sports. But he came out with an article earlier this week talking about another Super League concept that has been floating around, that has been proposed to multiple schools, that athletic directors and university presidents have seen. They've put eyes on it. And I thought it was a really interesting model. Let's start, though, with the name. Project Rudy, named after Rudy from Notre Dame, who was a little guy, a walk-on, who nobody gave the time of day. Nobody wanted to be on the team. The coach didn't even want him on the team. He had to grind and grind and grind and grind and work and work and work, and then still have his entire team step up for him, according to the movie at least, before he was afforded the opportunity to play for like a single down at Notre Dame. So he's a little guy who fought his way in to be included, which is ironic because Project Rudy would cut away about 66 schools that would not be allowed to participate or play games with the 70 schools that would be included in the Super League anymore. So it's pretty nasty work to name a Super League Project Rudy when you're cutting out all of the smallest, to quote Gordon Gee, little sisters of the poor. Pretty interesting. Also interesting to know that Rudy, as an adult, got like arrested for a pump and dump scheme. So, financially, not the greatest role model. Also a name for the little guys in the sport. Project Rudy. I guess if you look at it the other way, it's the perfect name for a Super League, really. But what is Project Rudy? It's a proposal that's been given to a variety of Power 4 schools. It's been floating around. Excuse me, gosh. That offers a new framework to a financial model that aligns with some of the growing pressures that we've been seeing for athletic rev sharing. So revenue sharing is coming. If you haven't seen the news, the settlement from the House versus NCAA lawsuit is tentatively agreed to now. The judge finally said, yeah, I think this is going to be good. They're going to have a hearing in April. And if the hearing goes well, everything is going to be in effect for 2025, which means that revenue sharing will be a thing. All of the changes to scholarship limits and roster sizes for sports will be a thing, so on and so forth. So this project offers a new framework for a new financial model that kind of plays into that. It's led by former Disney executives, now with an organization called Smash Capital, and it aims to merge financial innovation with the tradition of college football, all while securing significant private equity investment. Yes, so continuing on, this would be a 70-team Super League consisting of the schools across the SEC, Big 10, Big 12, and ACC. What if you do the math really quick? You know that the Big 10's got 18 schools, the ACC has 17, the SEC and the Big 12 both have 16, and that equals 67. So if you're going to get to 70, the question would be, okay, who are the other three? My guess would be probably Oregon State and Washington State, since they were just left out in the cold. That gets you to 69. Nice. Who would be the 70th? That'll be the great debate. Who would be the 70th team in this Super League Project Rudy? Memphis, Tulane? Those would be the two front runners, in my opinion. Texas State might have something to say. Liberty. What's going on with them, right? Interesting stuff. So the conferences would remain intact in this model. Game schedules would focus heavily on helmet matchups, right? These high-profile games, which is what drives financial incentive, drives revenue, drives TV ratings, all this other stuff, right? So, hey, if we're going to propose a new financial model, we got to ensure that it's actually going to make more money. More helmet games equals more money. Whether you like it or not, that is a fact. More helmet games equal more money. It would cut out some of the weaker non-conference games to maximize media exposure and rev generation. That would include none of the teams that were excluded from the Super League would be on the schedule of any team that is in the Super League. That is written. Ross puts that in writing in his article. So essentially all of those non-con games where TCU's playing Arkansas State or they're hosting Long Island at home would no longer exist. Super League teams would not be allowed to schedule those teams. Instead, they would all be games against other teams in the Super League. Part of what they've proposed would be a tier system, similar to what the NFL does, by saying, hey, your quote-unquote non-conference games would be against teams who finished with similar records as you last year. So 5-7 Oklahoma State plays its normal Big 12 schedule, and it'll play a team that was 5-7 from the Big 10, team that was 5-7 from the ACC, team that was 5-7 from the SEC. There you go. You got your non-conference schedule. Interesting concept. To an extent, makes a lot of sense for competitive balance. so that you're not just getting hammered by Ohio State and Alabama in their non-conference every year to prop them up. Instead, Alabama's 11-1, 12-1 at the end of the season. Ohio State's 12-1 at the end of the season. You know that those two teams are playing a non-conference game the next year. I mean, it makes sense when you want to talk about how do we generate more helmet games, make the product more interesting from a TV and revenue perspective. It really does make a ton of sense. Now, how do they get the financial backing? Obviously, media rights, network television would be a huge part of it. But part of what they've proposed is offering $9 billion worth of private capital up front, which would ease the school's transition into this rev model. Why would a school need to be eased into this rev model? Well, you've got to buy out these non-conference games so that you can have an unhindered schedule going into the Super League. So TCU would have to buy out Arkansas State. They'd have to buy out whatever FCS team is on their schedule, those kinds of things. And the goal would be to generate up to $15 billion over 12 years. And a key component to this would also be an expanded playoff system, providing more opportunities for schools to reach those postseason games, which we all know and love. We're learning right now in the midst of the first year of the 12-team playoff that regular season has not been hindered by this, the games mean less theory from a small but incredibly loud crowd. Alabama beating Georgia, not a playoff implication game. Still was a fantastic football game, and a shout out to Vanderbilt as well. So part of this is too thinking about, okay, well, how are we going to make sure that revenue works for everybody, because the bigger schools aren't going to want to be in a 70-team Super League where everybody's getting paid the same. So there would be 3 tiers based on performance that would pay out at different levels within this Super League. I think I saw. Let me go to the article. I don't have it pulled up. I just had my notes, and I didn't include this in my notes because I'm a big dumb idiot. Tier 1 would be the top 16 schools earn a per school revenue projected from about $130 million in year 4, escalating to $250 million in year 12. Tier 2 would be the next 22 schools that would earn a revenue of somewhere between $60 and $110 million over that course of time. And then Tier 3 would be the final 32 schools that would earn somewhere between $30 and $60 million over that course of time. So still a wildly significant drop-off from Tier 1 to Tier 3. I mean, you're talking about $100 million in year 4 of a difference, and you're talking about a $190 million difference in year 12. But you would have a way to move up and down those tiers based on performance, and aggregate results over a variety of seasons. There's a relegation and promotion system that would be involved in that as well. But part of that proposal was also having 8 permanent members of Tier 1 to essentially placate the biggest brands of the sport. So pick the big 8 brands, whichever you think they are. They would be locked into Tier 1, but there would be opportunity for other schools to move up into that tier. Interesting concept, truly interesting concept. So why is this proposal coming up? Well, rising pressure to pay athletes is probably the biggest one. Not to mention, schools really like lining their coffers with TV money. That's a big incentive. But the question is, over the next 10 years, with this settlement and having to pay back all of this money, schools are in a bind right now, truly. I mean, you're talking about starting out every financial year $2 million in the hole, because that's what you've got to pay out your portion to the NCAA versus House settlement. So there's an increasing demand to share rev. There's also the rev sharing. There's also the settlement. There's all of the other things that come with running an athletic department. There's a lot of money that comes in and out of these athletic departments. This would also provide long-term financial stability. I'm not the big fan of private capital. I'm working on getting a guest on the show that can talk a little bit more about private capital in the college football space, what that would actually look like, because it does give me a little bit of pause here. There are some folks that have seen this proposal that support it. Miami AD Dan Radakovich is one of the guys. He's quoted in the article from Dellinger. He says, of all the ideas floating around, this one makes the most sense. And I can see where he's coming from. It would make a lot of sense. And then this concept of eliminating bad non-conference games, you'd have more exciting matchups in non-conference, yada, yada, yada. There are some concerns and some criticism. SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey doesn't want anything to do with this. He thinks it would just water down the SEC. He's quoted here as saying, why hand over the keys to college football when we can make these decisions ourselves? So he's got a two-pronged complaint. One is he doesn't want to clutter up the SEC, which I don't think it would actually do that within reason. You would just have better non-conference schedules. The SEC wouldn't be able to just, do what they normally do to a Maine or a Southern Miss or something like that. They'd actually have to play other schools from P4 conferences for non-conference. And then he also doesn't want private equity involved. He thinks that the leagues would be able to do something like this on their own. Another big criticism, obviously, you're shedding, 60-something schools. They're left behind in this, and what do they look like? What do they look like if they can't play a Power 4 school and get a paycheck anymore? What happens to those athletics departments? Do they form their own kind of thing? Do they have their own playoff system? Who knows? And then, just the whole private equity thing is pretty interesting. And it's fun, too, that this all came out right now because the SEC and Big Ten have leaders meeting in Nashville this week. And Project Rudy is not officially on the agenda, but it's certainly going to come up in conversation as those two conferences start to put their heads together about what the future of college football looks like. Because make no mistake about it, whether you like it or not, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to have a major influence on what the future of college football looks like, both from a structural standpoint when it comes to conferences and playoffs, and also financial when it comes to what the money looks like. They're going to have a major hand and say in what happens next. So that's Project Rudy. It's a very interesting proposal. Obviously, TCU would be in because they're a part of the Big 12, and this would incorporate all of the current Power 4 schools. I don't know if there would be a relegation system out. That's something to think about. Would you get kicked out of the Super League? Say you go 0-12 2 years in a row. Are you just cooked? And then all of a sudden here comes Tulane taking your spot, or here comes Texas State or Liberty taking your spot. Who knows? But be interesting. Be interesting to see where this goes. The fact that you have a current AD on the record saying it makes a lot of sense gives me the sense that this is something that could become a reality. When? Who knows? This exact model? Who knows? But it's been circulated. ADs have seen it. They're not all opposed to it. And ultimately, when a guy like Greg Sankey says he's got some reservations, Greg Sankey answers to the presidents of the universities in his conference. And if the president of the universities in his conference say, hey, no, this is the thing that we want to do, well, I think Greg Sankey's going to find his way around to signing off on a piece of paper that, this is a good idea. So that's Project Rudy. Pretty interesting stuff there. We'll keep track of that as it keeps on going. But this has been another episode of the Frogs Insider Podcast presented by the Flying T Club. Thank you for listening. We appreciate you very much. Please make sure that you like and subscribe, that you leave a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts or over on the YouTube channel. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. Let's make that happen. It would be really, really cool to do it by Halloween so you can pick what I do, as Melissa said last time she was here. We will be back on Monday. Melissa will theoretically be back. If she's not, It's just going to be another bit of me talking, which I know you love. And then we'll keep on rolling the rest of the football season. We've also got some really cool content coming up. I'll tell you this. I'm working with both the men's and women's basketball teams to schedule some one-on-one interviews, to do some more long-form content with them. You've got, if you go back and you look at the Emmanuel Miller interview that I did over the summer, similar format to that. A sit down one-on-one with the student athletes, hearing their story, talking about their interests outside of the sport, that kind of thing. Really looking forward to getting those up and running as part of our partnership with the Flying T Club. And then baseball. We got some baseball stuff that we're going to need to talk about here soon. The white and the purple and white World Series is coming up October 31st through November 2nd. So make your way out to Lupton for that. It's a Thursday, Friday, and a Saturday to check in on TCU baseball, a team that I think is going to be pretty talented this year. Whether that talent leads to wins is to be determined, but I know they're going to have some talent. And with that, we will talk to you next time. Go Frogs.